How are we doing today, guys? Today we're going to be talking about absolute value. If you think you already know what absolute value is, why don't you pause the video and quiz yourself and try to find the answer to these 4 examples over here. If you don't know what absolute value is, feel free to keep watching. Okay? So a short definition of absolute value is just the distance of a number from 0, okay? And there's a very specific way we talk about that. We try to talk about just the magnitude of the number, which is like the size of the number. So for instance, if we have a guy and he walks from point A over to point B, we don't say, oh, he walks plus 5 miles or negative 5 miles, right? We don't say that. We just say, oh, 5 miles. We wouldn't attach a positive or a negative number to that. So likewise, if we have a point at negative 5, I want to know what is the magnitude of that number. What is the size of the distance from 0 to that number? So what is the distance from 0 to negative 5? Well, we're not going to say negative 5 units. We're just going to say 5 units. We're just going to say 5 units. And that's because we're only talking about the distance. We're not talking about the direction or anything else like that. So you could even think of it as, what if we needed to build a bridge from 0 to negative 5? How long would that bridge need to be? Well, it could be 5 units long. And then I'm also going to ask you, well, that means that 5 unit long bridge, right? We're going to say this is 5 units long. If we laid that down starting at 0, where else could we get to? Well, we could also get to 5, right? We could also get to 5, which has the same absolute value because they're both 5 units from 0, right? They're both 5 units from 0. Okay, there's a specific way we write this as well. We say the absolute value of negative 5 equals 5 because negative 5 is 5 units from 0. So just like negative 5, we would say the absolute value of 5 is also 5 units from 0. Okay, so negative 5, the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, and the absolute value of 5 is 5. So there's a couple tricks that students sometimes memorize that will lead them to do the wrong thing further down the road with negative numbers. So one thing is, sometimes they'll just say, oh, always get rid of the negative sign. And while that tends to work a lot, it won't help your the way you frame it in your mind later on down the road. So try not to memorize that trick. Also, try not to remember something like it's always the opposite, because that's definitely not true, right? We already saw the absolute value of 5 is negative 5 because that's also 5 units from 0. Okay, so now let's go over our few examples here on the right. We have, starting with negative 3. How many units from 0 is negative 3? Well, if you caught on to our first example there, you'll notice it's just 3 units. Okay, so the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Okay, nothing else to it. Likewise, we could also ask, well, what is another number? What is another number with the same absolute value? So what is another number that is also 3 units from 0? Well, that would be positive 3, right? We could say, you know, this is just an extra question, but say, what is the absolute value of positive 3? I'll rewrite that. That turned out a little weird. What's the absolute value of just normal 3? We'd say 3 because that's also 3 units from 0. So both of those numbers would have the same absolute value. Let's move on to number 2. What is the absolute value of 6? Okay, so how many units is positive 6 or just 6 from 0? We'd say 6. Okay, so nothing crazy going on there. How about negative 4 and 3/10? So negative 4 is right here, negative 3/10 maybe about right there. So how far, oops, oh, we're a little past that. How far is negative 4 and 3/10 from 0? It is 4 and 3/10 units. Okay. So likewise, oops, So I don't know what's going on there. So once again, we could say, well, what's another number with the same absolute value? And we could say, well, positive 4 3/10, the absolute value of that has the same absolute value, right? And same with 6. We could also say the absolute value of 6 is also 6, because it's another point on a number line that is the same distance from 0, okay? Let's move on to our last couple, or I guess last example here already. Like I said, short lesson, huh? Okay, 2 1/2, so positive 2 1/2. So I'm going to go 1, 2 1/2, and if I'm finding the absolute value, I want to know the magnitude of that number or the distance from 0. Okay, and that would just be 2 1/2 units. Okay. All right, so that's all for absolute value. There's definitely a lot of real life applications, especially when you talk in, like if you said, okay, the weight of a person, so someone maybe lost or gained weight, right? If we say, well, the weight of a person changed by 5 pounds, what could have happened? Well, they could have gained 5 pounds, right? Or they could have lost 5 pounds. Oops. Could have lost 5 pounds, right? So that's an instance where absolute value kind of comes into play. That's kind of like putting it in the real world. Or if we're talking about a bank account, someone's bank account changed by $10. What does that mean? Well, that means they could have added $10, or that means they could have subtracted $10. So that's kind of an instance of where absolute value comes into play in the real world, and why sometimes just memorizing a trick like, oh, take away the negative symbol, or it's just the opposite, won't always real work. But we'll talk more about real world situations with absolute value a different day. So that's all for absolute value today. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope it helped.